15 years. That's how long I'd been in America when David Whitmore first walked through the glass doors of my dealership on a humid afternoon in late September. 15 years of building something out of nothing. 15 years of speaking English with a stubborn German accent that no amount of late-night television and frustrated practice could fully erase. 15 years of mistakes, victories, lonely evenings, and the kind of success that, on paper, looked like everything a man could possibly want. My name is Maximilian Hartmann. Most people call me Max, though my mother in Munich still scolds me on our weekly phone calls for shortening the name she chose so carefully. I own Hartmann BMW of Chicago, a polished dealership tucked into a quiet corner of Lincoln Park, and I have spent the better part of my adult life convincing Americans that a German engineer understands their roads better than they understand them themselves. I am also, at 40 years old, a man who never truly expected to fall in love. Not really. Not the kind of love that breaks you open and rearranges everything inside until you cannot remember who you were before. But this is not a story I tell from the comfort of certainty. This is a story I am still living. A story that began with a man who hated my cars, who came to my dealership only because his wife insisted on them, and who, one rainy Tuesday in early October, asked me a question about a Charlie Parker recording that changed both of our lives forever. Before we continue, if you believe that love can still find us in the most unexpected places and want to help keep stories like these alive, you can support The Simple Gay Love on Patreon. Now, back to the story. I was 25 when I left Munich. My father had wanted me to take over the small but respectable accounting firm he had built brick by brick over 30 years. He wanted me to marry a nice German girl, give him grandchildren with blonde hair and serious blue eyes, and continue the line of practical, careful Hartmann men who had never disappointed anyone. I disappointed him the moment I stepped onto the plane to O'Hare with nothing but 2 suitcases, a business degree, and a letter of introduction to a distant uncle in Chicago who promised he could help me get started in the automotive world. My father did not come to the airport to see me off. My mother cried into her handkerchief and pressed a small silver St. Christopher medal into my palm, the one her father had worn through the war. She said, in that quiet way she had of saying important things, "You go and find what you cannot find here, Maximilian, and do not feel guilty for going." I did not understand then what she meant. I understood that she meant adventure, opportunity, the great American promise. What I did not understand was that she had always known something about me that I had never quite been brave enough to know about myself. The dealership was not mine in the beginning. I started as a junior salesman at a BMW location in the suburbs, where I sweated through cheap suits and worked 60-hour weeks to send money home and prove my father wrong. I rose. I learned. I bought my first piece of the business at 32, and at 36, I cut the ribbon on my own dealership in Lincoln Park. With my name on the sign and a glass of overpriced champagne in my hand, and absolutely no one in my life to share it with. That was the part nobody ever talks about in those magazine profiles they did of me, when they called me a self-made man and the immigrant success story of the year. The empty apartment overlooking the lake. The dinners I ate alone at the same Italian place on Halsted Street, where the owner had stopped asking me about my plans for the weekend. The way I had carefully constructed a life so full of work that there was no room left for the question of who I actually was. I had dated women, 2 seriously, both lovely, both kind, both completely wrong for reasons I could not articulate even to myself. The first, Anna, a German expatriate who worked in finance, ended things after 18 months because, as she said with surgical precision over a glass of Riesling, "Maximilian, you treat me like an excellent business partner. I want to be loved, not invested in." The second, Claire, an American art teacher with a laugh that could fill a room, gave up after a year. She did not say anything cutting. She just kissed my cheek one Sunday morning and said, "I think you are still waiting for someone, even if you don't know it yet. I cannot be that person." I told myself she was wrong. I told myself I was simply too busy, too focused, too European in my reserve. I told myself many things to avoid telling myself the truth. And then David Whitmore walked into my dealership. The first time I met him was actually 6 years before everything began. He was 38 then. I was 34. He came in with his wife Emily on a Saturday afternoon, the kind of bright autumn day where Chicago shows off and pretends it never has winters that will freeze your eyelashes shut. They were looking for an X5. Emily was driving the conversation, asking about leather options and panoramic sunroofs, and whether the X5 came in that very specific shade of metallic graphite she had seen on a friend's car. David stood slightly behind her, hands in the pockets of his perfectly tailored navy blazer, smiling that polite husband smile that men learn when they have accepted that certain decisions in a marriage will simply not include them. I noticed him. Of course I noticed him. David Whitmore was the kind of man who walked into a room and slightly rearranged the air around him. 6'2", broad-shouldered, with dark hair just beginning to gray at the temples, and the kind of jawline that looked like someone had drawn it specifically to win arguments. His eyes were a startling pale blue, almost gray, set in a face that had clearly seen sun and laughter in equal measure. He wore a wedding band, a thin gold thing that caught the showroom light when he gestured. He smelled like cedar and bergamot and something else I could not name. I noticed him the way I had trained myself not to notice men. Quickly, professionally. And then I shut the door on the noticing and turned my full attention to his wife, who was telling me about her favorite features and her preferred color and the specific way she wanted her seats heated in 3 separate zones. It was David, though, who shook my hand at the end. A firm, warm grip. He looked me in the eye and said, "You speak good English for a German." Then he grinned, that easy American grin that took the sting out of the words and turned them into a kind of friendly teasing. I mean that as a compliment. I worked with a guy from Stuttgart once. Took me 3 months to understand a word he said. My English is better than my German now, I told him, surprising myself with the truth of it. I dream in English. My mother says it makes her sad. Mothers, he said, with a soft, knowing laugh. Mine still calls me Davy. I'm 40 next year, and she still calls me Davy. We stood there for a moment longer than was strictly professional, with Emily already halfway out the door, looking at a champagne-colored 5 Series in the lot. Then he tipped me a small salute and followed her out, and I watched him walk to the car and open her door for her. And I told myself that the small, sharp feeling in my chest was just the late lunch I had eaten too quickly. That was the first time. Over the next 6 years, David and Emily Whitmore came back 4 times. A new X5 when Emily decided 2 years was long enough to drive any car. A convertible 4 Series for her 40th birthday. A 7 Series sedan for what David told me was their 15th wedding anniversary, and which Emily told me, in a separate conversation while David was in the bathroom, was really for me, because David's always wanted to drive me around in something serious. And then, most recently, the previous spring, an X7 because Emily had decided she needed something taller, more commanding. The kind of car that lets people know I'm coming. Each visit, David was the same. Patient, pleasant, holding doors, writing checks, slightly more silver in his temples each time. The same scent of cedar and bergamot. The same easy grin that he reserved, I noticed, for me specifically. The way you might reserve a particular smile for a colleague you genuinely liked, but would never socialize with outside of work. I began to look forward to their visits, in the way I might have looked forward to a long lunch with an old friend. Except David was not my friend. He was a customer, and his wife was the one who actually drove our business. And I was a married woman's car dealer, I had no business feeling whatever it was I felt when he walked into my showroom. I never told anyone. There was no one to tell. My closest friend in Chicago was a man named Ronaldo, who ran the service department, a Brazilian who had been with me since the beginning, and who would have absolutely teased me to death if he had suspected I was nursing a quiet, harmless little ache for a married American customer. So I kept it to myself. I let myself enjoy our brief conversations. I let myself look forward to Emily's 2-year cycle of dissatisfaction. And I told myself that this was as much as I would ever have, and that this was, in fact, more than enough. I should explain something here before we go any further. In Germany growing up, I had known, not the way some men know with a confident clarity from the time they are 10. I had known in the quiet way, the buried way, the way that lets you function and date girls and become an excellent student and a good son. I had known the way you know about a small fire you have decided not to feed. The kind you keep alive only with the smallest sips of oxygen. The kind that lives in the corner of a room you have closed and locked and pretended is full of something else. I had been with one man, exactly once, when I was 21. A summer in Berlin. He was a French architecture student named Etienne, and he had kissed me in a stairwell after a party. And I had let him. And what followed was 3 weeks of the most alive I had ever been in my life. And when he flew back to Lyon at the end of August, I closed that door so firmly I almost convinced myself it had never opened. For 19 years, I had not opened it again. Not because I was ashamed exactly. Not because I was afraid of what other people would say. Though there was some of that too. Mostly because I had built a life that had no slot in it for the man I might have been if I had stayed in that Berlin stairwell. And then, on the first Tuesday of October, when the trees in Lincoln Park were just beginning to turn that particular shade of red that means winter is coming whether you are ready or not, David Whitmore walked back into my dealership alone. That was unusual on its own. In 6 years, I had never once seen him without Emily. He came in without an appointment, which was also unusual, because David was the kind of man who scheduled coffee with himself. He was wearing jeans, which I had also never seen, and a charcoal sweater under a slightly rumpled leather jacket. And his hair was a little longer than usual, and there were faint dark circles under those pale eyes. "David," I said, surprised, coming out from behind the small desk in the corner where I had been doing paperwork because my normal office was being repainted. "I didn't know you had an appointment. Is everything—" "I don't," he said. "Have an appointment, I mean. I just—" He paused, ran a hand through his hair, looked, for the first time since I had known him, almost shy. "I was driving past, and I thought maybe you'd be here, and I thought maybe you could help me with something." "Of course," I said. "What is Emily—" "It's not for Emily." The way he said her name. Something in it. Like the name had a small piece of glass inside it now. Before I could respond, the music shifted overhead. We had a small, very expensive sound system installed throughout the showroom, and I had refused, from the very first day, to let it play the kind of generic luxury retail music that other dealerships played. I had always insisted on jazz. Real jazz. Coltrane, Parker, Davis, Ellington, Hawkins, sometimes Monk when I was in the mood to make my customers slightly uncomfortable. My sales team had complained about it for years. I had never once given in. A new track had just started. Embraceable You. Charlie Parker, 1947, the Dial Sessions recording. The slow, aching one, with that long, mournful saxophone line that always felt like a man writing a love letter he knew he would never send. David stopped. Mid-sentence, mid-thought. His head tilted slightly upward, the way you might tilt your head if you thought you heard your name being called from a great distance. "This is Parker," he said. "It is. This is the Dial Sessions one. 47, I think, not the later version with strings." I stared at him. In 6 years of selling him cars, In 6 years of polite conversations about weather and rates and the difference between X-Drive and S-Drive. In 6 years of Emily telling me about her vacation plans and her sister's wedding and her trainer who had recommended she try Pilates. In all of that, David Whitmore had never once mentioned music. Not once. "You know Charlie Parker?" I asked. And I could hear in my own voice how stupid the question sounded, because of course you know Charlie Parker. Everyone knows Charlie Parker. But this was not the kind of knowing where you have heard his name. This was the kind of knowing where you can identify a recording in 3 seconds from a single phrase of saxophone. David looked at me. Really looked at me. And it was as if some small invisible wall, the one we had both been carefully maintaining for 6 years, had just developed a crack down the middle. "My father," he said. "He was a jazz pianist. Wasn't a famous one. Played clubs in Detroit when I was a kid, then moved us out to a little place in Indiana when my mother got sick. He taught me Parker before he taught me how to ride a bike. I grew up." He stopped, cleared his throat. "I grew up with Parker and Davis and Sonny Rollins playing in the living room while my dad practiced. He used to make me listen and tell him which one I liked best that day. He said it was a way to teach me about feelings without him having to use words for it." I forgot for a moment that I was supposed to be selling him a car. "You never told me," I said, "in all this time. You never told me you played jazz in your showroom. I assumed you would have noticed." He smiled. Slowly. A different smile than the one he had given me 4 times before, in the company of his wife. This one had no audience. This one was just for me. "Emily hates jazz," he said. "She says it sounds like everyone is playing a different song. So I sort of." He gestured vaguely at the ceiling, at the music drifting down. "I sort of stopped letting myself notice it when I was around her. I didn't even realize you were playing it the other 4 times we came in. I think I had trained myself." We stood there. Parker kept playing. Somewhere behind us, a customer was being shown a new 3 Series, and Ronaldo was on the phone with a supplier, and the everyday clatter of my dealership continued around us. But for a long moment, it felt as if we were standing in a slightly different room than everyone else. "What did you come in for?" I asked finally. "I want to buy a Mustang," he said. I laughed. I couldn't help it. "David, we don't sell Mustangs." "I know you don't sell Mustangs. I know. He laughed too, a tired, slightly broken laugh, the kind that means a man is closer to crying than he wants to admit. "I just thought maybe you could tell me where to go. I want a 1968 Mustang Fastback. Dark green. I've wanted one since I was 8 years old. And I have spent the last 6 years buying my wife BMWs because that is what she wanted. And I drove a Lexus because it was sensible. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, I stopped buying anything for myself, and..." He stopped, looked at the ceiling, took a long breath. "And I'm 44 years old, and I have never owned anything that I picked because I picked it." I did not know what to say. I felt, in that moment, that I was watching a man begin to walk out of a room he had been standing inside for a very long time. I felt, also, something else. Something more selfish, which was the very clear understanding that he had come here, to me, alone, on a Tuesday morning, when he could have gone anywhere else in the entire city of Chicago to ask about a Mustang. "Sit down," I said. I gestured to the small couches near the espresso machine. "Let me get you a coffee. I will make some calls. I know a man in Joliet who restores vintage Fords. He is a friend of a friend. He can find you a 1968 Fastback in any color you want. Sit, please." He sat. I made him an espresso. I did not call my friend in Joliet, not yet. I sat down across from him and said, "Forgive me, but what is happening?" He was quiet for a long moment. He turned the small espresso cup in his hands, watching the dark liquid catch the showroom lights. "Emily and I are getting divorced," he said. The sound system shifted again. A new track. In a sentimental mood. Duke Ellington and John Coltrane. The 1962 recording. The one that always made me close my eyes when no one was watching. David smiled at the ceiling this time. The smallest possible smile. "Your boss has good taste," he said. "I am the boss." "I know." I was teasing. Now, before I tell you what David told me that morning, sitting in the corner of my showroom with two espressos and Ellington and Coltrane playing softly overhead, I want to do something. I want to ask you something. Because this is where the real story begins. And I would very much like to know who is listening. So if you are still with me, wherever you are in the world tonight, whether you are driving home from work or lying in bed with the lights off, or doing the dishes with one earbud in, please write in the comments which city you are listening from. I want to imagine all of you, scattered across the map, hearing this story at the same time. It would mean a great deal to me to picture you there. Now, back to David. He told me, in the slow, careful way of a man who is still trying to make sense of his own life, that things with Emily had been wrong for a long time. Not loud wrong, not the kind of wrong with screaming and broken plates. Quiet wrong, the kind of wrong where you wake up one morning next to a person you have lived with for 16 years, and you realize that you have not had a real conversation. The kind where you actually tell each other something true in over 4 years. He told me that Emily had been spending more and more time at her gym. Not the regular gym where they were both members. A second one. A small private studio in a strip mall in Naperville, where she went 3 mornings a week and sometimes also on Saturday afternoons, with a personal trainer named Trevor, whom she had been seeing for almost 3 years. At first, David said, I thought it was just that she liked working out. She got into great shape, started wearing different clothes, started talking about deadlifts at dinner parties. I was happy for her. I joked that her trainer must be a magician. I made a lot of stupid jokes. He smiled at the espresso cup, the smile of a man laughing at his own past stupidity. Then I started noticing things. She talked about Trevor a lot. She talked about Trevor more than she talked about anyone, including me. She mentioned his opinions about food, his opinions about cars, his opinions about politics. She would say things like, Trevor thinks Italian wines are overrated. Or, Trevor says BMWs hold their value better than Audis. David looked up at me when he said that. And something in my chest, which had been loose and curious, suddenly went still. Oh, I said. Yeah. I did the math very quickly. 3 years of Trevor. 3 years of Emily insisting on specific BMWs in specific colors with specific configurations. 3 years of me selling her, essentially, the personal preferences of a man I had never met. David, I said, I am sorry. Don't be. You sold us beautiful cars. Still, he waved it off. He had the air of a man who had already cried his way through this part of the story in private, and was now telling it to me with the calm of someone reading from a book. Anyway, he said, I noticed all of that, and I told myself I was being insecure. I told myself men have insecurities about their wives and their wives' personal trainers, and I should not be that kind of cliche. So I let it go. For about a year, I let it go. And then last week, he stopped. He looked suddenly very tired. You don't have to tell me, I said. No, I do, he said. I think I need to tell someone who isn't my lawyer or my mother. I think I need to say it out loud to someone who knew us. You knew us, Max. You sold us 5 cars. 6, I corrected gently. The first X5, the convertible, the 7, the X7, and the second X5 you traded in. Plus the X5 you bought before that, the very first one, 6 years ago. He stared at me. You remember every car? I remember every car, I said. It is a flaw. It is not a flaw. The way he said it. Quiet, like he was setting something down very carefully on a table between us. I cleared my throat. Last week, I prompted. Last week, he said. I was looking for the paperwork for our new house insurance. We just refinanced. Emily had put a stack of mail in the drawer in our front hall, and I was rummaging around looking for one specific envelope, and I found. He paused. I found a letter, handwritten, in her writing, folded into thirds and tucked into one of those small white envelopes you buy at a stationery store, with a stamp on it, as if she had been going to mail it, but hadn't yet. I waited. It was addressed to Trevor. I waited. And I want to be clear about one thing, David said. I knew, the second I saw the envelope, that I should put it back. That a marriage where you have to read your wife's mail is already over. And I should put it back and confront her and end things like an adult. I knew that. And I opened the letter anyway. Because some part of me needed to see it in her own handwriting. I needed it to be real. What did it say? He looked at me. His eyes were very clear, very tired, very pale in the showroom light. It said that she was in love with him, that she had been in love with him since the first week she started training, that she had tried for 2 years to push it down, that she knew it was unfair to me, that she knew he was married and would not leave his wife, and that she had decided to write him this letter to confess everything, and that she did not expect him to leave Rachel for her, but that she could not keep working out 3 times a week and pretending that her chest did not collapse every time he walked into the room. The dealership around us had gone quiet somehow. Or maybe I just stopped hearing it. Rachel, I said. The trainer's wife. Trevor's wife, yes. And he never. I tried to find the right phrasing. He never. No, David said. That was the worst part. That was the part that, weirdly, almost made me admire him. Trevor never touched her. Trevor, according to my wife's letter, had told her very clearly, the one time she had hinted at her feelings, that he was married to Rachel and that he intended to stay married to Rachel, and that he would prefer if Emily kept her workouts strictly professional. Apparently, he repeated this conversation about every 6 months when he could sense she was struggling. He never crossed a line. Not once. David laughed, a small, dry laugh. My wife has been in love with a man for 3 years, he said. She bought a car every 2 years based on his stated preferences. She let me think I was buying her gifts, when really I was buying her a way to talk to him about something she knew he cared about. And the man himself, the man she was in love with, never even reciprocated. The whole thing was happening inside her own head with him as an unwilling co-star. And I was, somehow, the only one in the cast who did not even know there was a play. I did not know what to say. I am not by nature a man who knows what to say in moments of emotional disclosure. I am a man who is more comfortable explaining the difference between dynamic damper control and adaptive M suspension. But I knew sitting there that any words at all would be better than no words. David, I said, what you are telling me is one of the most painful things a person can find out. I am very sorry. I am sorry I sold her so many cars. I am sorry I did not know. I am sorry you found that letter. He looked at me with those pale eyes. He looked at me like I had just said the only correct thing. Thank you, he said. That is the first time anyone has said they were sorry. My lawyer said congratulations. My mother said it would all work out. My brother said something about how I should keep the lake house. You are the first person who has actually said the words, I am sorry. I felt heat in my face. I felt also a kind of low, warm hum in my chest, the kind I had spent 15 years training myself not to feel. Of course I'm sorry, I said. You should not have had to find that letter alone. I shouldn't have had to find it at all. No, you shouldn't. We sat for a while. Ellington kept playing. Then it was a Bill Evans piece I always programmed in after the Ellington. Piece. Just the piano. Just that strange, slow, unresolved chord that hangs in the air like a question no one has yet figured out how to ask. David sipped his espresso. It must have been cold by then. He did not seem to mind. "So I came here," he said, "to buy a Mustang. To buy a Mustang. To buy something for myself. Something Emily would have hated. Something Trevor would have called impractical. Something my father, if he were still alive, would have walked around 3 times and then sat down inside of and just..." His voice caught a small catch, a small unspoken thing, and just smiled. "Your father's gone?" 8 years. I am sorry. You apologize a lot. In German, we have a saying. It is rude to my father to translate, but it is something like, if you are not the cause of someone's pain, you are still a witness to it. And a witness should bow. He looked at me for a long moment. "You're an interesting man, Max Hartmann." "I am a car salesman." "You sell cars. That doesn't mean you are one." I do not know why that sentence broke something open in me, but it did. I looked at David Whitmore, sitting on my showroom couch in a charcoal sweater and his slightly rumpled leather jacket, with his graying temples and his Parker recognition and his cold espresso and his wife's letter folded somewhere in the inside pocket of his coat. And I felt something I had not felt in 19 years. I felt a stairwell in Berlin. I felt the door inside me, the one I had closed and locked and built a dealership and a reputation and an entire American life on top of, give a small but very distinct tremor. "David," I said before I could stop myself, "have dinner with me." He went very still. "For," I said suddenly and immediately backpedaling, "for the Mustang, for research. There is a man I know who restores them, Henrik. He is Danish, but he lives in Wicker Park. He owns a 1968 fastback himself. Dark green. I am sure I could arrange. I could." I took a breath. I made myself stop talking. I made myself say what I had actually meant. Or just dinner. Not about the car, just, "You should not eat alone tonight." He looked at me. For a long, long moment, he looked at me, and I had absolutely no idea what was happening behind those pale gray-blue eyes. Then he said, very softly, "There is a place on Wabash. The Green Mill. They have a Tuesday night quartet. The piano player is supposed to be one of the best in the city. I have been meaning to go for 2 years, and I keep finding reasons not to." "I know the Green Mill," I said. My voice sounded distant somehow, as if I were watching myself speak from somewhere above the showroom. "Would you?" David said, slowly, carefully. "Would you want to go with me? Tonight?" The Bill Evans was still playing, the slow chord still hanging. I thought about my father, who had not come to the airport. I thought about my mother, who had pressed a saint's medal into my hand and told me not to feel guilty for going. I thought about Etienne in Berlin, 21 years old, kissing me in a stairwell and laughing into my mouth and telling me, in French, that I had the saddest eyes of any man he had ever met. I thought about 15 years of espressos for one, 15 years of jazz playing for an audience of myself. "Yes," I said, "I would very much like to go with you tonight." David smiled, the third smile, the one I had not yet seen, the one where his eyes got slightly damp at the corners and the lines around them deepened, and the polite husband smile and the brave divorce smile both fell away. And something else, something I had never been allowed to see before, came forward. "Pick me up at 7, he said. "I'm staying at my brother's place in Wicker Park. I'll text you the address." "You'll text me," I repeated. We had exchanged numbers years ago. He had used mine maybe 4 times, all of them to confirm service appointments. "I'll text you." He stood. He set the empty espresso cup down on the little glass table. He looked suddenly at the ceiling, where Peace was just resolving itself, finally, into the closing chord that always made me want to sit down and stay sitting for a long time. "Max," he said, "thank you for the coffee. Thank you for telling me. I haven't told anyone. I know. He walked to the door. He paused, with one hand on the glass, and turned back to me. The October light came in through the window behind him and outlined him, just briefly, in a hard pale gold. "I never bought a single one of those cars because I wanted to," he said. 6 BMWs. Not one of them. You should know that. The reason I kept coming back was not the cars. "What was it?" I asked. But I think I already knew. I think some part of me had always known, in the way you sometimes know things you've spent 6 years not letting yourself know. "It was the man who sold them to me," he said. And then he opened the door and walked out into the bright, cold October morning. And I stood in my showroom with Bill Evans fading out and a cold espresso cup on the table, and the entire architecture of 15 years of carefully built loneliness beginning, very quietly, to shift beneath my feet. I sat back down on the couch. I put my head in my hands. I laughed, very softly, into my palms. Ronaldo came over. He looked at me with the expression of a man who has known me for 15 years and could tell, just by the way I was sitting, that something had changed. "Max," he said carefully, "are you all right?" I looked up at him. I think I was smiling. I think there were tears in my eyes. I am not entirely sure what my face was doing. "Ronaldo," I said, "I think I am going to a jazz club tonight." He blinked. "You don't go to jazz clubs." "I know. You haven't gone out on a Tuesday in maybe 5 years." "I know. With who?" I looked at him. I considered for 1 second lying. I considered for 1 second deflecting. I considered for 1 second the version of myself I had been for 19 years. And then I thought about a stairwell in Berlin, and a saint's medal in my mother's hand, and a man with pale eyes who had just walked out of my showroom telling me that the reason he had bought 6 BMWs was me. "With David Whitmore," I said, "the customer." Ronaldo, to his enormous credit, did not say a single thing. He just nodded, very slowly. Then he reached out and put a hand on my shoulder, the way a brother might. And then he walked back toward the service department with the air of a man who had just been entrusted with something delicate and was determined not to drop it. I sat there alone on the couch for a long time. The next jazz track came on. I had programmed the playlist myself, years ago. I knew exactly which song was next. It was Coltrane's Naima, the slow, devastatingly tender one, the one he had named for the woman he had loved most in his life. I closed my eyes. I let it play. Outside in Lincoln Park, the leaves kept turning, and the wind picked up off the lake. And the great American city went on with its Tuesday afternoon, and a man named David Whitmore was, presumably in a cab somewhere, going back to his brother's apartment to change his clothes for dinner with me. And I, Maximilian Hartmann, German immigrant, Chicago car dealer, 40 years old and not yet somehow, finished becoming who I was always meant to be, sat on a leather couch in my own showroom, and finally, let myself begin to hope. I did not know yet what would happen at the Green Mill that night. I did not know yet about the things David would tell me at the end of the second set. When the lights came up between songs and his hand, almost accidentally, brushed mine on the small round table between our drinks. I did not know yet about the phone call that would come at 2 in the morning, or about the letter Emily would write 3 weeks later, or about the day David's mother would call me from Indiana and ask if I would please come for Thanksgiving because her son seemed lighter, somehow, than he had in years, and she wanted to meet the reason. I did not know yet about the night David would stand in my apartment for the first time, looking out over the lake, and say, very quietly, with his back to me, the sentence that would undo me completely. I did not know any of that yet. All I knew, in that moment, was that Coltrane was playing, and the door inside me was open for the first time in 19 years, and a man with pale gray-blue eyes was going to text me an address. And that, for the first time in a very long time, I was not going to be eating dinner alone. The drive to my apartment to change clothes took 11 minutes, and in those 11 minutes, I went through approximately 400 separate emotional states. I drove faster than I should have on the inner drive, past the joggers and the dog walkers and the great gray patience of Lake Michigan on a cold October afternoon. I gripped the steering wheel of my own personal car, a perfectly tuned M5 in dark blue that I'd been telling myself for 3 years was the only thing in my life I had bought purely for pleasure. And I tried to remember the last time I had felt nervous in this specific, very particular way. I could not remember. I could not remember because I had never felt it. I had been nervous about exams, about business meetings, about the phone call I made to my father from a payphone at O'Hare the night I arrived, when I told him I had landed safely, and he had said only, "I hope you are eating properly," and hung up. I had been nervous about many things. I had never been nervous about a man. In my apartment, I stood in front of the closet for a long time and did the thing I had not done in 19 years, which was to consider, with serious attention, what David Whitmore would think when he looked at me. I chose dark gray trousers and a black turtleneck. I considered, for a moment, the navy suit jacket my tailor had been encouraging me to wear more, then decided against it. I did not want to look like I was at work. I did not want to look like I had tried too hard. I did not, I realized, with a small and slightly hysterical laugh, into the bathroom mirror, want to look like a man taking another man's wife's husband to a jazz club for the first time in his life. I put on a watch my mother had sent me for my 35th birthday. A simple Glashütte, German-made, the kind you wear when you want to feel like you have brought a small part of home with you. I splashed cold water on my face. I checked my phone. David had sent the address an hour earlier. A small, handsome courtyard building on Honore Street. I drove to Wicker Park with my hands sweating against the steering wheel. He came down before I could text him I had arrived. I saw him through the windshield, walking out the front gate in a dark gray sport coat and a white shirt open at the throat, and the streetlight caught the silver in his hair. And I had to take a long, slow breath before I unlocked the doors. He slid into the passenger seat. He smelled like cedar and bergamot and something fresh. Something almost like rain. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, "You look nice." I look like a turtleneck. You look like a German in a turtleneck. I find this very charming. I laughed. It surprised me, the laugh. It came out easy. "Where exactly is the Green Mill?" I asked, even though I knew. I needed something to say. "Lawrence Avenue, uptown. Tell me how to get there. Pretend I am a tourist." He smiled at me sideways. "You have lived here for 15 years. Pretend anyway." So he gave me directions I did not need, and I drove the route he described, even though I would have taken a faster one. And the two of us moved north through the city of Chicago on a Tuesday evening in early October, with the lights of the skyline reflected off the lake to our right, and a Bill Evans track I had not consciously selected playing softly through the M5 sound system. We did not say much. The silences were not uncomfortable. The silences felt like the kind of silences you have with someone you have actually known for a long time, even if you have only recently noticed it. The Green Mill is one of those Chicago places that has been exactly what it is since before any of us were born. A red velvet front, a long wooden bar with brass fixtures, booths along the wall with small lamps, a stage barely large enough for the 4 men who would play that night. The kind of place where Al Capone is supposed to have had his own booth, and where the bouncer still gives you a look if you talk during the music, and where the air smells faintly of bourbon and old wood, and 100 years of saxophones. We were lucky with a small table near the side of the stage. I ordered a Manhattan because it felt like the kind of thing a man would order in a place like that. David ordered a bourbon, neat, the cheap house pour. When the waitress raised an eyebrow at him, he said, "The expensive ones are wasted on me. I want to taste the room more than the whiskey." The quartet came on at 8:30. Piano, Upright bass, tenor sax, brushes on the drums. They opened with Body and Soul. The slow, late night, all the aching in the world version. The piano player, a thin black man in his 60s with hands that moved like water, leaned into the first chord with the kind of patience that only comes from 40 years of playing the same song different ways. David closed his eyes. I watched him. I could not help it. The amber light from the small lamp on our table caught the edge of his jaw, the small, soft place at the corner of his mouth where a smile was almost forming, the long, dark lashes against his cheek. He kept his eyes closed for almost the entire first chorus. When the sax came in, he made a sound, low in his throat, the kind of sound you make when something hurts in a good way. And his hand on the table tightened slightly around the glass. When he opened his eyes, he was looking at me. He did not look away. I did not look away. We sat there for what could not have been more than 3 or 4 seconds, but felt like a long passage in a piece of music. And we just looked at each other across a small round table in the green mill with Body and Soul turning slow circles around us. Then the song ended, the room applauded, and David smiled at me, slow and a little crooked, and said, I haven't been to a place like this in a long time. I have never been here. What? Once. For a Christmas party 12 years ago. I sat in the back and did not enjoy myself because I was trying very hard to impress an investor who was eventually convinced by someone else's pitch. Max. What? You own a dealership in Chicago and you have not been to the Green Mill in 12 years. I told you, I am a flawed person. That is not a flaw, that is a tragedy. He said it lightly, but there was something else underneath it. A small, kind seriousness. A sense, almost, of being newly and personally offended on my behalf. As if my failure to go listen to live jazz for 12 years was a small injustice he intended to correct. Then take me to all the places I've been missing, I said. I said it before I thought about it. I said it like it was the kind of casual sentence one man might say to another, when really, in my mouth, it tasted like something else entirely. He looked at me. He took a slow sip of bourbon. Okay, he said. That was when I knew that the night I had been imagining as a one-time, careful, generous gesture toward a man going through a divorce was actually something different. That was when I knew that I was not, in fact, in control of any of this. That was when I knew that the door inside me, which had cracked open in the showroom that morning, was now standing wide enough to walk through. The quartet played 2 more sets, standards mostly. Stella by Starlight, Round Midnight. A long, almost angry version of Equinox, where the piano player and the saxophonist seemed to be having a private argument they had been having for 30 years. Between sets, the lights came up just slightly, and the bartender brought us another round without asking. And we talked. I will not tell you everything we talked about. There is a thing that happens when 2 people sit at a small round table in a dim jazz club and begin to actually talk, where the conversation moves so naturally and so quickly through so many different rooms of a person's life that to try to recount it later is like trying to describe a dream. You can only really remember the shape of it. I can tell you that David told me about his father, the jazz pianist who had taught him Parker before bike riding, who had died of a sudden heart attack at 61 while practicing in the living room of the little house in Indiana. I can tell you that I told him about my own father, who had not yet died, but who I had not seen in person in 9 years, and who I called every Sunday at 3 in the afternoon Chicago time, and who had still, in our most recent conversation, asked me when I was going to settle down. I can tell you that David asked me, somewhere in the second set, whether I had ever been in love, and that I told him about Etienne in Berlin. The whole thing, the stairwell, the 3 weeks, The August morning at Tegel Airport, when I had hugged a French architecture student goodbye and walked back to a taxi and decided that I was going to be a serious German son and never let myself feel that particular kind of feeling again. I had never told anyone that story. Not Anna, not Claire, not Ronaldo, not my mother. I told David Whitmore in the Green Mill, in a low voice over a half-empty bourbon, while a saxophone leaned into the bridge of Misty 3 feet from our table. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. He looked down at his hands on the table. "Max," he said, "were you ever happy? After Berlin?" I thought about it. I thought about it honestly, the way I would not have allowed myself to think about it at any other point in my life. "I was successful," I said. "I was respected. I was useful. I built a thing. I have been many things." "That isn't what I asked." "I know." He nodded. He did not push. I took a long breath. "No," I said. "Not really. Not in the way I think you mean." His hand was resting flat on the table. The light from the lamp made the edge of it look gold. I do not remember deciding to do it. I do not remember thinking about it. I remember only that my own hand moved, slightly, just enough to bring my smallest finger to rest along the side of his. He did not pull away. He did not move toward me either. He just looked down at our hands, the smallest possible touch. 2 grown men sitting in a public jazz club with a quartet playing Misty, and the bartender laughing about something behind the bar, and our hands not moving, neither of us moving, neither of us looking up. After a moment, he turned his hand over. Slowly, he laid his palm up on the table. He did it without looking at me. He did it like he was setting something down very carefully so that I could decide what to do with it. I put my hand in his. We sat like that, under the table for the rest of Misty. We did not look at each other. We just listened. His thumb moved once, very lightly, across the side of my wrist. That was all. Nothing else. It was the most erotic thing that had happened to me in 19 years. The set ended. The lights came up. We pulled our hands back. We drank the rest of our drinks in silence, both of us slightly red in the face, both of us, I think, terrified. When we walked out onto Lawrence Avenue at 1 in the morning, the temperature had dropped. The wind had a fall edge to it. David pulled his coat closed and put his hands in his pockets and walked beside me toward the car, and for 2 full blocks, neither of us said anything. I want to pause the story here for one moment, because I owe you a small confession. I have been a careful man my entire life. I have been the kind of man who plans every conversation, every meeting, every relationship for maximum efficiency and minimum risk. The man I am about to tell you about. The one who walked David Whitmore back to a parked M5 on a cold October night in Chicago and made a choice he had been avoiding for 19 years. That man was not me. Or rather, he was a version of me I had not been since I was 21 years old in a stairwell in Berlin. He was a version of me I had spent 15 years pretending did not exist. I want you to understand, before I tell you what happened next, that I was not pretending anymore. Before we continue, if this story is moving you, if you believe love deserves the time it takes to find us, please consider supporting The Simple Gay Love on Patreon. Your support is what makes it possible to keep telling stories like this one. Now, back to the story. We reached the car. I unlocked the doors. I did not get in. David did not get in either. We stood there for a moment, on the sidewalk, with the M5's quiet little lights blinking and the cold biting at my ears and a street lamp above us making a small circle of gold in the dark. "Max," David said. "Yes." "I do not know what I'm doing." "I do not know what I'm doing either." "I've been married for 16 years. I know. I have never." He paused. He took a breath. "I have never done this." "I know. I do not even know what I'm asking for." "I know." He laughed. A small, startled laugh. You keep saying, I know. I do know. How do you know? I looked at him in the streetlight. I looked at him in his charcoal sport coat with his hair slightly mussed from the wind and his pale eyes very bright and very tired and very, very awake. Because I have spent 19 years knowing, I said, just by myself. I know exactly what you are not saying. I am not going to make you. Say it tonight. He looked at me. He looked at me for what felt like a long time. Then he stepped forward, and he put one hand very gently on the side of my neck, and he kissed me. It was a careful kiss. A first kiss. The kind of kiss two grown men give each other when one of them is 44 years old and has never kissed a man in his life, and the other one is 40 and has not kissed a man since 1995. It was warm and slow and a little uncertain and absolutely, undeniably real. He tasted like bourbon in the cold air. His hand on my neck was warm. When he pulled back, he did not pull back far. Our foreheads almost touched. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. That happened. Yes. I am not going to apologize for that. Please don't. We stood there for another moment in the gold street lamp circle, and then we both, somehow, started laughing at the same time. Not because anything was funny, because we had both been holding our breath in slightly different ways, for slightly different reasons, for what felt like our entire lives, and the sudden release of it had no other place to go. I drove him back to his brother's place in Wicker Park. We did not talk much in the car. He sat next to me with his head turned just slightly toward me, the way you sit when you cannot stop looking at someone and you're trying to be discreet about it. I kept my eyes on the road. I felt his attention on me like a low, warm light. When we got there, he did not get out immediately. He sat in the passenger seat. He turned his body slightly toward me. I am not asking to come up, I said. I want you to know that. I am not even close to asking that. I know. And I'm not going to assume anything from tonight. Max. He turned more. He looked at me very seriously. Stop. I am the one who kissed you. I am the one who did that. I want you to know that. I want you to know I knew what I was doing. You said 2 minutes ago you did not know what you were doing. I did not know what I was asking for. That is different from not knowing what I was doing. I had to laugh. He smiled. He reached out in the dim glow of the dashboard and traced the very edge of my jaw with his thumb, just once. Then he drew his hand back into his lap. Will you have dinner with me again? He said. Yes. Tomorrow? Yes. And the day after? Yes, David. He nodded. He took a slow breath. All right, then. He got out of the car. He walked up the steps of the courtyard building. He turned at the gate and lifted a hand in a small wave. Then he was inside, and I sat alone in my own dark car in front of his brother's apartment for several minutes before I trusted myself to drive home. I did not sleep that night. Not because I was unhappy, because I could not stop replaying the slow, careful pressure of a hand on the side of my neck. The next 3 weeks were the strangest and brightest of my adult life. We did not, in those first 3 weeks, sleep together. David asked me, on our second dinner, if I would let him take it slowly. He said that he was terrified of doing this wrong. He said that he had to know, with absolute certainty, that what he felt for me was not just the wreckage of his marriage looking for somewhere to land. He said that he respected me too much to be careless with what we were starting. I told him I had waited 19 years. I could wait a little longer. What we did in those 3 weeks was almost more dangerous than anything physical would have been. We saw each other almost every night. He came to the dealership for lunch some days, and we ate sandwiches on the back patio behind the service bays where Ronaldo could see us, but no one else could. And Ronaldo gave us a small, private nod and brought us cold, sparkling water without comment. We went to small restaurants in Andersonville and Lakeview, where we sat in dark corner booths and did not, anymore, sit on the same side of the table because we had both noticed that we could not keep our hands off each other when we did. We went back to the Green Mill twice. We went to a Coltrane tribute night at the Jazz Showcase. We went to a little Brazilian place where Ronaldo had a cousin who played guitar. And the cousin came out at the end of the night and recognized me and gave Ronaldo a phone call the next morning. But Ronaldo, again, said nothing. We talked. So much. About everything. About my mother, who had figured something out from my voice. In our Sunday phone calls, and who had said, in her careful way, "Maximilian, you sound different. I am glad. I do not need to know more than that." About David's father, who would have loved me, David said. Because his father had loved anyone who could tell Parker from Coltrane and who took jazz seriously. About my dealership and his architecture firm. About the cars we had loved as boys. About Etienne, who I had finally tried to look up online and discovered was now a moderately successful architect in Lyon, married to a woman named Sandrine, with whom he had 2 daughters. Good for him, David said quietly, and good for you that he is in Lyon and not in Chicago. We did not, in those first 3 weeks, talk about Emily. She existed at the edge of our conversations, a figure in another room, a signature on legal papers David was beginning to sign. He told me briefly that he had moved out, that he had taken only what was actually his, that he had left her the house and the lake place and the X7 and the convertible and almost everything else, because he wanted more than anything to have nothing in his life that he had to argue with her about. "What about Trevor?" I asked him once, late, in my car outside his brother's place. I had not been able to keep myself from asking. "What about him? Have you spoken with him?" "No." "Will you?" David thought about it for a long moment. He looked out the window at the row of brownstones along Honoré Street. "I have decided I am not going to," he said. I thought about it. I thought about driving out to his gym in Naperville. I thought about saying things. But the more I sat with it, the more I realized. He paused. Trevor did not do anything to me. Trevor did not even know. The story Emily told herself, the story she has been telling herself for 3 years, is not Trevor's fault. He told her clearly, repeatedly. He was kind in his own way. I am not going to ruin a man's marriage because my wife wrote him a love letter he never asked for. I looked at him in the dim light from the dashboard. "You are a better man than I am," I said. "I am not. I am just very tired of being angry." The 2 a.m. phone call came on a Wednesday, at the beginning of the 4th week. I had been asleep for maybe an hour. I had been at my dealership until late. Then a late dinner with David. Then he had gone back to his brother's place because he had an early meeting. And I had come home and fallen into bed, exhausted and happy, in a way I did not yet know how to describe to anyone. My phone rang. I almost did not answer it. I saw David's name and the time, 2:11 a.m. My heart dropped through the bed. "David. Max." His voice was strange. Not crying, not angry. Strange. "Are you awake?" "I am now. What is happening?" "She found out." I sat up. I turned on the lamp. "She found out what?" "Us. She found out about us. Someone saw us. Someone she knows saw us at the Brazilian place 2 weeks ago and just..." A long breath. "Just told her tonight. She just called me. She is screaming, Max. She is screaming and crying and screaming and..." "David, are you safe?" "Yes. Yes. I am at my brother's. She has been calling for an hour. I do not know what to do. I do not know how to." "Stay there. Do not pick up if she calls again, or do, if you want to, but you do not have to. I am coming over. Do you want me to come over?" "Yes." I was out of bed already. I was pulling on jeans. I was grabbing my keys. "I am driving. I am 10 minutes away. Do not pick up if she calls again. Just sit. Sit on the couch. Breathe. I am coming." He was quiet for a moment. I could hear him breathing. "Max." "Yes." I am sorry. Do not be sorry for any of this. Are you crazy? I am coming. I hung up. I drove to Wicker Park in what must have been the longest 10 minutes of my life. I parked badly. I went up to his brother's apartment, where the brother, a quiet, decent man in his late 30s named Robert, whom I had met exactly once, and who had looked at me with the same careful, pleasant evaluation he had probably given the women David had brought home in college, opened the door and stepped aside without comment. David was sitting on the living room couch in pajama pants and a t-shirt with his hands in his hair and his phone face down on the coffee table. I sat down next to him. I did not touch him at first. I waited. He turned his head. He looked at me. His eyes were red. Then he put his head down on my shoulder, and I put my arm around him. And we sat like that for a long time without saying anything at all. Behind us, Robert quietly went back to his bedroom and closed the door. He had been more generous to us in that small gesture than most people in our lives would be in the months to come. After a while, David started talking. He did not lift his head from my shoulder. He told me everything Emily had said, the shouting, the names, the accusations of betrayal, the accusations of secret lives, the accusations of having lied to her for the entire 16 years of their marriage. The way she had laughed, at one point, a high, awful laugh, and said, "All those cars, all those years, and you were the one who was a fag the whole time." The way she had then cried and said she did not mean it, and then said it again. He told me she had threatened to tell his mother, to tell his clients, to make sure everyone in their suburb knew exactly what kind of man David Whitmore really was. He told me she had said his father would be ashamed of him. That one, he said quietly, was the only one that had hurt. "Your father would not be ashamed of you," I said. I said it without hesitation. I said it because I knew it the way you know certain things about the parents of the people you love, even when you have not met them. I knew it because David had spent 4 dinners telling me about a man who taught his son to recognize Charlie Parker before he taught him to ride a bicycle, and who, when his son had been bullied in 5th grade for liking jazz instead of football, had taken him out for ice cream and told him that the world would always try to make him smaller and his job was to refuse. David lifted his head. He looked at me. His eyes were still red. His mouth was a little crooked. "You did not know my father," he said. "I know enough." He laughed, a short, wet laugh. "You know what is funny?" "What?" "She kept saying I'd been lying to her for 16 years. And the truth is, Max, I think I have been. I think I have. I do not think I knew exactly what I was lying about. I did not have a name for it. I did not think of myself as a man like." He paused. He looked at me. "I did not think of myself as a man like you. I thought of myself as a man who was just not very interested in any of it. Sex with Emily, sex in general. I thought I had a low drive. I thought I was just." He shrugged. "Boring. I genuinely thought I was just a boring person about that. And now? Now I have been thinking about you for 3 weeks, and I cannot sleep." I did not know what to say to that. I leaned forward and I kissed his forehead. He closed his eyes. "Stay," he said, very quietly. "Tonight. I am not asking for. I am not asking for anything. I just do not want to be alone in this apartment tonight. I will stay." He took my hand. He pulled me up off the couch. We lay on top of the covers in his brother's spare bedroom, fully clothed, my arm around him and his head on my chest. And that was how he fell asleep. Slowly, in pieces. Like a man finally letting go of something he had been carrying for a very long time. I lay there for hours afterward, awake, listening to his breathing, watching the small bar of light from under the door. I had never held another person all night before. I had not realized what a profound and frightening thing it was to be entrusted with another body's sleep. In the morning, Emily emailed him a letter. She had not written it the night before. She had written it the morning of, after she had calmed down. It was 3 pages long. David read it standing in the kitchen of his brother's apartment in a t-shirt and pajama pants while I made coffee. His face went still as he read. When he finished, he handed me the phone. I read it. It was a strange letter. It was the kind of letter you write at 6 in the morning when you have not slept and you are trying very hard, after the worst night of your life, to be a serious adult. She apologized for what she had said on the phone. She said she did not mean the words she had used about him. She said she was hurt and that the hurt did not justify the cruelty. She said she had spent the night thinking, and what she had concluded was that David and she were both, in different ways, people who had been hiding from themselves for a long time, and that what was happening to their marriage was both of them finally being unable to hide anymore. She did not mention Trevor by name. She mentioned, in passing, my own complicated feelings of recent years, and apologized for those too, in a general way, without quite admitting to anything specific. She wrote that she would not be telling David's mother. She wrote that she would not be telling anyone in their suburb. She wrote that whatever else she was not going to be the kind of woman who used a man's most private self as a weapon. She wrote at the very end, "If this man is real, David, and what you feel is real, then I am not going to make it harder than it already is. We have to be allowed, both of us, to be honest finally. I think we owe ourselves that, even if we do not owe it to each other." She signed it M, not Emily. I gave him back the phone. He stared at it for a long time. "That is not the letter I expected," he said. "No. That is a kinder letter than I deserve. I think it is the letter she needed to write more than the letter you needed to receive." He looked at me. He half smiled. "You are very smart sometimes, Max. I have lived a long time alone. I have had time to think." He poured himself coffee. He stood at the counter and drank it. He looked out the kitchen window at the gray Chicago morning. After a while, he said, "I do not know if I can forgive her yet, but I am glad she wrote it. I think it makes everything cleaner." "It does. What now?" "Now," I said, "we go on. Now you finish the divorce. Now I take you to dinner at a place that does not serve sandwiches on a patio. Now we stop sneaking around. Now you come to my apartment finally, because I have been trying to invite you for 2 weeks and you keep being polite about it." He turned. He looked at me. "Is that the invitation?" "It is the invitation. Tonight. Tonight." "Yes," he said. "Okay." That evening, when he stood in my apartment for the first time, I watched him from the kitchen doorway. He moved through my living room slowly, the way you move through a museum when there is a piece you have been wanting to see for a long time. He looked at the books on my shelves. He looked at the small framed photograph of my mother and father at their wedding in 1972. He looked at the records arranged carefully in the long, low cabinet along the wall. All jazz, alphabetized by artist, organized by decade within each artist, which he stopped in front of and laughed softly. "You are kind of insane," he said, "just so you know." "I am German." "Yes, I see that now." He walked to the window. My apartment was on the 18th floor of a building in Streeterville, and the window looked east across Lakeshore Drive and out over the lake. It was full dark by then. The lake was a great black silence, with the lights of the drive moving along the near edge of it. The lights of Navy Pier glowed off to the south. He stood there with his hands in his pockets and his back to me for a long time. I made dinner. I am not a great cook. I make 4 or 5 things well. I made one of them, Spätzle, which I had learned from my mother when I was 8 years old, standing on a wooden stool at her kitchen counter in Munich. With a sausage from a German butcher I drove to in Lincoln Square once a month, and a salad David himself had asked for that morning because he had said, Otherwise, you will feed me bratwurst, and I will die of joy. We ate at the small table in the kitchen, because I never used the dining room. We drank a Riesling from the Mosel that my mother had sent for my birthday, and that I had not opened because I'd been waiting for an occasion. I told him this. He laughed. "What does it taste like?" he asked. "Like home." He took a sip. He thought about it. "It tastes like a river," he said. "A cold river. Apples and a cold river. Yes. Your mother chose a good wine. My mother knows things." After dinner, we did the dishes. Together. He washed, and I dried, and we did not, the entire time, stop touching each other in small ways. The back of his hand against mine when he passed me a plate. My hip against his when I reached over him for the dish soap. It was, I thought distantly, the most domestic moment of my entire life. I had never washed dishes with another person in my own apartment. I had been alone here for 9 years. Afterward, we sat on the couch. We listened to a record. He picked it. He picked Coltrane's Ballads, which I had told him in the 3rd week of knowing him was the record I played when I could not sleep. The record that had gotten me through the early years in Chicago when I had felt the most invisible and the most alone. He picked it without asking. He just walked to the cabinet and found it and put it on. We sat on the couch with the music low and the lights of Lakeshore Drive moving slowly past the window, and the wine almost gone, and my arm around his shoulders, and his head on mine. For a long time, neither of us spoke. "Max." "Yes." "I have to tell you something." "All right." He sat up. He turned his body toward me on the couch. He took both my hands. He looked at me very seriously, with those pale eyes that had become, somehow, the most important pair of eyes in my entire life. "I read the letter again," he said. "Emily's letter, this morning, before I came over." "All right." I read it 3 times. There was something in it, something that did not match what I knew. What did not match? He took a breath. He looked at me very carefully, as if he were trying to decide whether to tell me at all. "She wrote that she had been hiding for a long time," he said. "She wrote that we both had. She wrote that what was happening to our marriage was both of us being unable to hide anymore." "Yes. Max." He squeezed my hands. "What if Emily is? What if the letter to Trevor was not? What if it was not the whole story?" I did not understand. Not at first. He saw that I did not understand. He took a long, slow breath. "I think," he said carefully, "I think there is something Emily has not told me. I think there is a reason she chose those exact words this morning. I think there is a reason she did not name Trevor. I think there is a reason she said my own complicated feelings of recent years instead of just admitting what we both know she was admitting." "David, what are you saying?" "I am saying I think the letter to Trevor was not the only letter. I am saying I think Emily wrote that letter to him because writing it to the person she actually wanted to write it to was too difficult to imagine." I stared at him. "David, who?" He shook his head. He almost smiled. It was not a happy smile. "I do not know yet," he said. "I do not know yet. But I think when I find out, it is going to change everything I thought I knew. About her, about me, about 16 years of our life together." I sat back. The record kept playing. Coltrane was leaning into "Say It" over and over again. That slow, devastatingly tender ballad where the saxophone sounds like a man trying to make himself believed. I looked at the man sitting on my couch in my apartment in Streeterville on a Wednesday night in late October, with his hand in mine and his pale eyes serious, and his life cracking open in ways neither of us yet fully understood. "All right," I said. "Then we find out?" He nodded. "Together?" "Together." He leaned forward. He kissed me. Slowly, carefully, with more weight in it now than the kiss on Lawrence Avenue had carried. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine, the way he had the first time. And he said very quietly, the sentence I told you about in part 1. The sentence I would not understand the full meaning of until much later. The sentence that, sitting in my apartment with Coltrane playing and the lake dark beyond the window, would undo me completely. He said, "I have known about myself for a long time, Max. I think Emily has too. I think we were each other's hiding place." And I sat very still on my own couch and felt the entire architecture of what I thought this story was begin, very quietly, to rearrange itself underneath me. Because if David was right, if Emily had been hiding too, then the story of their marriage, and the story of the personal trainer, and the story of every BMW I had sold them over 6 years, was not the story I had been told. It was something else entirely. And whatever it was, we were about to find out. I did not sleep that night. David slept. He fell asleep on my couch with his head against my shoulder and the Coltrane record finishing on the turntable and the lights of Lakeshore Drive moving in slow gold lines past the window. And I sat very still under the warmth of him and tried to put the pieces together in the dark. We were each other's hiding place. I turned the sentence over and over in my head, like a stone you have pulled out of a river. I looked at it from every side. I tried to understand what David had meant by it. I tried to understand what he had not yet said. By the time the sky began to gray over the lake, I had started to see the shape of it. Not the details, not yet. But the shape. A marriage of 16 years where two people had quietly, mutually, and without ever quite admitting it to each other, agreed to be the wall the other one stood behind. A wife who had chosen, 3 years ago, a man she could not have as the safest possible focus for feelings she did not want to examine. A husband who had told himself, for 16 years, that his low interest in his wife was a personality flaw, rather than a fact about his orientation. Two people who had built a beautiful suburban life out of two carefully maintained silences. And in the middle of it, somewhere, a third silence. A real one. The one Emily had not named. The one she had hidden behind the louder, more convenient story of the personal trainer. I watched David sleep. I traced the line of his jaw in the gray morning light. I thought, whatever it is, we will get through it. I did not yet know how strange the truth was going to turn out to be. He woke up around 7. He blinked at me, confused for a moment. And then his face softened into the slow, quiet smile that I was beginning to learn was the smile he gave only when he had just remembered all over again where he was and who he was with. "You did not sleep," he said. "How do you know?" "Your eyes are red. Also, you are sitting in exactly the same position you were in when I closed my eyes. You watch closely." I have been wanting to watch closely for 6 years. I made coffee. He took a long shower. When he came out in one of my t-shirts that was a little too big in the shoulders for him, he sat down at the kitchen table and said very calmly, "I think I need to call Emily." "Today?" "Today." "And ask her what?" "Just to talk, just to ask. The letter she sent me yesterday morning, the way she wrote it, the things she did not say. I think she is ready. I think she is waiting for me to ask the right question." I looked at him. "Do you want me there?" I asked. He thought about it. Honestly. He thought about it the way he thought about most things, slowly and with patience. "No," he said. "Not for the call. But I want to come back here afterward. I want to come back here and tell you whatever I learn. Is that all right?" "Yes." He left around 10. I went into the dealership. I tried, and largely failed, to do any work. Ronaldo took one look at me and brought me an espresso and a small piece of pound de queijo his wife had baked. And he did not ask any questions, and I loved him very much in that moment. David came back to the apartment a little before 3. I had been pacing for most of an hour. I had told myself several times that whatever he had to tell me, it would not change anything between us. It would not change what had happened on Lawrence Avenue. It would not change his hand on my neck in the street lamp gold. It would not change the way he had fallen asleep against me with such absolute trust. Whatever he had to tell me, I was not going anywhere. He came in. He did not take off his coat. He stood in the middle of my living room with his hands in his pockets, the same way he had stood in front of the window the night before. And he looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face. Something between grief and amazement. Something almost like awe. "Max," he said. "Yes." It was Rachel. I stared at him. "Trevor's wife," he said. "Trevor's wife, Max." It was Rachel. It was always Rachel. For 3 years it was Rachel. I sat down on the couch. He sat down next to me. He took both my hands. He started to talk. He talked for almost an hour without stopping. Emily had told him everything. She had met Trevor first, yes, 3 years ago when she joined the gym. She had not been in love with him. She had been a little attracted to him, the way many of his clients were. The way you might be casually attracted to any good-looking trainer in a small private studio. He had been pleasant, professional, kind. He had introduced her, in passing, to his wife. His wife, who had walked into the studio one morning to bring Trevor a forgotten lunch, was a woman named Rachel Sandoval, 36 years old, an art curator at a small gallery in Oak Park, with dark hair cut blunt at her shoulders and a long, slow, knowing smile, and a voice that, Emily said, had made her feel like she was being addressed personally for the first time in her entire life. Emily had not understood at first what was happening to her. She had only known that she found herself making excuses to be at the gym at the times Rachel might appear. She had begun to dress differently for her workouts. She had begun to read every email Trevor sent her with a desperate hope that it would mention his wife. After a year of this, she had finally admitted to herself what was happening. And she had panicked. She had been raised by a Pentecostal grandmother in Indiana. She had been married for 13 years at that point to a man she loved in the comfortable, distant way. She loved her brothers. The idea of being in love with a woman, of having always been able to be in love with a woman, of having spent her entire adult life building a marriage that had been, on some level, a way to never have to ask the question, was a thing she did not know how to hold in her own mind. So she had done the things some people do when they cannot face the real shape of what they feel. She had displaced it. She had transferred it. She had decided, with a kind of furious determination, that what she was actually feeling was an inappropriate attraction to her personal trainer, because at least that was a story she had a script for. A bored housewife, a handsome trainer, a cliché, a thing that could be confessed in a women's magazine. She had written the letter to Trevor 2 years ago, in a state of half panic and half relief. She had not actually sent it. She had written it as a kind of test of herself. She had wanted, she told David, to see whether putting the feelings on paper would relieve them. They had not been relieved. She had folded the letter and put it in a stationery envelope and tucked it into a drawer and forgotten, almost, that she had ever written it. She had then spent the next 2 years sitting with the actual truth in private. She had not acted on it. She had not, she swore to David, ever once kissed Rachel or even hinted at her real feelings to her. She had simply, week by week, gone to the gym, watched Rachel come and go, and felt herself become a stranger inside her own marriage. The letter David had found 3 weeks ago, the one in the drawer in their front hall, was not a new letter. It was the same old one. She had been clearing out the drawer in early September, had found the letter again, had read it once, had felt nothing for Trevor and everything for Rachel, and had absent-mindedly tossed it back into the pile of mail before walking out of the room to make a phone call. She had forgotten it again. When David had found it and confronted her with it, she had panicked a second time. She had let him believe what he had clearly already believed. She had even, in their first ugly conversations, leaned into the trainer story. Because admitting to her husband that she had been in love with a woman for 3 years was, she had said, the one thing she had not been able to bring herself to do in the chaos of those first days, after a lifetime of religious shame and small-town terror. But the night before, when she had called David screaming at 2 a.m., something had broken in her. She'd spent the whole next morning writing the letter she had emailed him, the careful one, the one with the line about her own complicated feelings. She had written it as a coded confession. She had been hoping that David would read it and ask her the question. And that morning, he had. She had cried for 40 minutes on the phone with him, David said. She had told him everything. She had apologized for having let him take the harder version of the truth. She had told him she had filed her own discovery letter with their lawyer that morning, so that nothing about their divorce would be contested. She had also told him, in a quieter voice toward the end, that she had reached out to Rachel 2 weeks ago. Just to coffee. Just to tell her, finally. And that Rachel had cried too. And that Rachel had told her, after almost an hour of conversation, that she had known for 2 years. That she had known since the first time Emily had come to the studio. That she had also been waiting. That Trevor had filed for an amicable separation himself 3 days ago. I sat on my couch in my apartment in Streeterville on a Wednesday afternoon in late October, holding the hands of the man I had just begun to love, and I tried to absorb what I was being told. David, I said. I know. David. I know, Max. I know. I laughed. I could not help it. It was not a happy laugh exactly. It was the laugh of a man who has just been told that the universe is much more poetic and much more strange than he had been giving it credit for. We were each other's hiding place, I said. That is what she said, word for word. She said it to me on the phone today. She said, David, I think we were each other's hiding place, and I am so sorry I did not figure it out until I was 45 years old. 45. 45. 16 years of marriage. 16 years. And you both. And we both. We sat with it for a long moment. The afternoon light outside had turned that thin, clear autumn gold that Chicago gets sometimes in late October, the kind of light that makes you feel like the city has been polished for you. It came in through my window in long, flat slats across the floor. David, I said, are you all right? He thought about it. He really thought about it. I am, he said finally. I think I am. I think I am, in a strange way, relieved. I think. He paused. He took a slow breath. I think for a long time I was angry at her because I thought she had been deceiving me. I thought she had been having something I was not allowed to have. And it turns out she was just. He smiled sadly, but really smiled. She was just hiding behind me, the same way I was hiding behind her. We were not betrayers. We were just two scared people who had not yet figured out how to be honest. What happens now? Now we get divorced, cleanly, generously. She's going to keep the house in Naperville. I am going to keep the lake place. Neither of us cares about any of it very much. We are going to be friends, I think, eventually. She told me she wants that. I told her I want that too. Good. Max. He turned my hands palm up, looked down at them, traced the lines with his thumbs. Max, I have something else to say. All right. I have been telling myself, for 3 weeks, that I was being careful about you because I wanted to be sure. Because I owed it to you to be sure. I have been telling myself I needed to figure out what was the divorce and what was you. Yes, that was true in the beginning. It is not true anymore. It has not been true for at least 2 weeks. I waited. He looked up. He looked at me very directly. I am sure, he said. I have been sure. I have been waiting for the part of me that was supposed to be uncertain to show up. And it is not coming. There is no uncertain part. The only thing I am uncertain about is how long I have been wanting this, and not letting myself know I was wanting it. felt heat behind my eyes. I did not say anything. He leaned forward. He kissed me very softly on the corner of my mouth. "I am taking you to Indiana for Thanksgiving," he said. I laughed. I could not help it. "You are?" "Yes. My mother called me yesterday, before all of this. She wanted to know who I had been spending time with because I sounded different on the phone. I told her I was seeing someone. She asked if it was serious. I said yes. She asked if she could meet you at Thanksgiving. I said yes. So now I am asking you. Will you come to Indiana for Thanksgiving and meet my mother and let her decide for herself that you are good enough for her son?" "David, what did you tell her about me?" "I told her your name. I told her you sell cars. I told her you were German. I told her you have very good taste in music." "Did you tell her I am a man?" He smiled, the slow smile. "I told her your name was Max," he said. "She asked me on the phone, in that careful way she has, whether Max was short for Maxine. I said no. She was quiet for about 3 seconds. Then she said, 'Oh, good. Then we don't have to worry about the wine. Your friend Max will not need the sweet stuff your aunt insists on bringing.'" I stared at him. "What?" "My mother is 78 years old," he said. "She grew up Methodist in southern Indiana. She's been married for 51 years to a man who died 8 years ago and who taught me jazz. And when I told her I was seeing a man named Max, her actual response to me was a comment about the wine pairings." "David, I know. Your mother, I know." I started laughing, really laughing. I laughed until I was crying a little, and David was laughing with me. And neither of us was entirely sure why we were laughing, except that the universe had spent the last 3 weeks turning out to be much more generous than either of us had been preparing for. Before we continue, if this story has reached you, if you have ever felt like the part of you that needed to be hidden might also be the part that finally lets you be found, please consider supporting The Simple Gay Love on Patreon. Every share, every contribution, every comment makes it possible to keep telling these stories. Now, back to the story. We drove to Indiana on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. David had a Subaru he had bought for himself the week after his divorce had been finalized in early November. Not a Mustang. Not yet. He had told me, with a small grin, that the Mustang was something he wanted to save up for, the way his father would have, even though he could afford to buy one tomorrow. He wanted it to feel earned. So in the meantime, he had bought a sensible Subaru wagon in dark green, which his father, he said, would also have approved of for entirely different reasons. We loaded it with wine, with a German Christmas stollen I had ordered from a bakery in Lincoln Square, with a small wrapped box for David's mother that contained a glass-hooded travel clock I had picked out with what I considered enormous thoughtfulness, and with a slightly larger wrapped box that David had refused to let me see, and that he had simply placed in the back without explanation. We drove south through Indiana on Route 41. The land flattened, the trees thinned, the sky widened. It was the kind of drive I had taken once or twice in my early years in America, when I had needed to remind myself how much country there was beyond Chicago. How much of America was, in fact, not a city at all. I had forgotten that. I had been buried in Lincoln Park for 15 years. I had forgotten that Indiana existed. David's mother lived in a small white house with a wide front porch in a town called Veedersburg, Indiana, population around 2,000 3 hours south of Chicago. The house had been his father's family's house. His grandparents had bought it in the 1940s. His father had grown up in it. His parents had moved into it when David's mother had gotten sick 25 years ago, and they had decided together that they wanted to live somewhere where she could see the same field outside her window every morning until she got better. She had gotten better. They had stayed. We pulled into the gravel driveway around 4 in the afternoon. The light was that low, slanted November light that turns every farm field into a postcard. His mother came out before we had reached the front door. A small woman, gray-haired, in a faded denim apron over a wool sweater, with David's pale eyes and a quick, economical way of moving. She walked straight past her son and put both her hands on my face. "Maximilian," she said, "I am very pleased to meet you. Mrs. Whitmore. Helen. Helen." She studied me for a long moment with those eyes that were exactly David's. She did not smile. She did not frown. She just looked. "David," she said, without turning to look at him, "you did not tell me he was so handsome. You let me prepare a casserole for a handsome German man, as if he were not handsome. I would have made the apple cake." "Ma, what? I am being honest." She turned back to me. She patted my cheek once, in a way that was both formal and entirely warm. "Come inside, Maximilian," she said. "I have been wanting to meet the person making my son sound like his father again." I almost cried in the gravel driveway. I almost cried right there. I think Helen noticed because she did not say anything about it. She just took the wine out of David's hands and walked into the house. Thanksgiving was the four of us. Helen, David, me, and David's older sister Margaret, who lived in Indianapolis and who arrived around 6 that evening with her husband Phil and their 2 teenagers in tow. Margaret was a kind, slightly nervous woman in her late 40s who hugged me too long and asked me 3 separate times if I was sure I was warm enough. Phil shook my hand and said, "Welcome, Max. It's good to have you," and then went back to watching football in the den. The teenagers ignored everyone, including each other, with the magnificent self-absorption of teenagers everywhere. Helen had made the casserole. She had also, sometime in the afternoon while we had been resting in the guest room, made the apple cake. That night, after dinner, after Margaret and Phil and the teenagers had gone to a hotel in town because there was not room in the house, after the dishes had been washed by Helen and David while I dried, I had insisted, and Helen had laughed and let me. I sat with David's mother in the small living room with the wood stove going. David had gone upstairs to call his lawyer about one last paper that needed signing. Helen poured me a small glass of bourbon. She poured one for herself. "Maximilian," she said. "Yes. I want to tell you something." "All right." She looked at the wood stove for a long moment. The light from it caught the silver in her hair. "My husband knew," she said, "about David. He never said it out loud, but he knew. He used to say, when David was a teenager, 'That boy is going to take a long way around to where he is going.' I asked him once, when David was 22 and bringing home that nice girl Beth, what he meant. He said, 'Helen, you have to let him take the long way.' And then he never said it again. I did not say anything. I did not trust my voice. 'I think my son took the long way,' she said. 'I think he is finally close to where he was always going. I think you are part of where he was always going. I am sorry his father is not here to meet you. He would have been very pleased.' Helen. I am an old woman, Maximilian. I do not have time to be careful with my feelings about my son. I am going to tell you the truth. The truth is that I have been waiting for a long time to see him happy. The way he was happy when he was 8 years old, listening to records with his father. He has been carrying something heavy for a long time. I do not need to know what. I only need to know that with you, it is lighter. I can hear it on the phone. I looked at the fire. He is a very good man, I said. Yes. I do not know if I deserve him. Maximilian. Yes. That is the wrong question. That is the kind of question men ask when they have not yet learned how to receive a gift. I will give you some advice. Do not ask whether you deserve him. Ask whether you are willing to take care of what you have been given. That is the only question. I sat in her small living room with the wood stove and the bourbon and the very specific November silence of rural Indiana outside the window. And I felt myself become, in that moment, an entirely different man than I had been 6 weeks earlier. I am willing, I thought. I am willing. The next morning, David and I went for a walk before breakfast. We walked along a small road behind the house that led out into the fields. The frost was still on the grass. Our breath came out in white clouds. He had given me a hat that had been his father's, a gray wool cap, and I wore it with what I think was almost embarrassing pride. We walked for almost an hour without talking. Then we came to a small wooden bridge over a creek that was beginning to freeze at the edges. We stopped on the bridge. David turned to me. "Max." "Yes." "I want to ask you something. And I want you to know that I am not asking out of any rush. We have been at this for 2 months. I am aware of that. I am aware that 2 months is not a very long time. So I am not asking for an answer today. I am asking the question, and I want you to take whatever time you need." He paused. He took both my hands in the cold. He looked at me with those eyes. "Will you live with me?" he said. "Eventually. Not right away. When we are ready. When the dust from all of this has settled. Will you sell the apartment in Streeterville and let me sell the lake place, and let us find somewhere we both choose, together, that is neither of our previous lives? Will you build a place with me, Max?" I looked at him. The cold air burned a little in my throat. "Why are you asking me on a bridge in Indiana?" I said. "Because my father proposed to my mother on this bridge in 1971. And because I wanted to ask you somewhere that has nothing to do with cars or jazz clubs or your apartment or my brother's apartment. I wanted to ask you somewhere that was just a place with a creek in the middle of a field where you could think about it without anything else getting in the way." I started to laugh. I could not help it. I laughed, and then I cried, and then I laughed again, and David was laughing too. And the cold was making it worse. Our faces were red, our noses were running, and I was 40 years old and standing on a wooden bridge in Veedersburg, Indiana, and a man with pale eyes had just asked me to build a life with him. "David," I said, "take your time." "David, I do not need to take time." "Take your time anyway." "David, the answer is yes. The answer was yes the day you walked into my showroom and said you wanted a Mustang." He pulled me into him. We held each other on the bridge for a long time. The sun came up over the field. The frost began to lift. Somewhere behind us, in the small white house, Helen Whitmore was making coffee. And the smoke from the wood stove was rising thin and gray into the November sky. It would be 6 more months before we found the house. It was a small brick coach house in Andersonville, on a quiet block off Clark Street, with a tiny back garden and a wood-burning fireplace, and a built-in shelf along one wall of the living room that we both said, the first time we walked through it, was clearly meant for jazz records. The kitchen had a window that faced east. The bedroom had a window that faced west. The previous owners had been a retired professor and his husband of 30 years, and they had agreed to sell to us for slightly less than the asking price because, the professor said over coffee, "Iko, I have a feeling about you too." We moved in on a Saturday in May, almost exactly 9 months after I had stood on the bridge in Indiana. I sold the apartment in Streeterville. David sold the lake place. Emily came to the new house 2 weeks after we moved in, with a casserole and an old hardback book of Charlie Parker transcriptions that had belonged to David's father, which she had been keeping all these years and which she wanted to give back to him properly. She and David sat on the couch and talked for 2 hours. She and I sat at the kitchen table afterward, and she told me, in her quiet, thoughtful way, that she had moved in with Rachel 3 months earlier in a small apartment near her gallery in Oak Park. That she had not been happier, possibly, in her entire life. That she was sorry about the BMWs. I told her not to be sorry about the BMWs. We laughed about the BMWs. We laughed about how absurd it was that she had bought 6 of them, essentially, as the wallpaper of a feeling she had not yet been able to name. I told her my own mother had also taken until she was almost 50 to start telling me the truth about her own life, and that I did not hold it against either of them. She hugged me when she left. She said, "I am glad David found you." I said, "I am glad you found Rachel." She smiled, a small, clear smile. "We took the long way," she said. I said, "Helen says that is the only way some people can go." She laughed at that and walked back to her car and drove away into the May afternoon. David's mother came for Christmas. She stayed for 2 weeks. She slept in the small guest bedroom and woke up every morning at 6 and made coffee and read mystery novels in the kitchen until we came down. She helped me set up the jazz shelves the way David's father had taught him. She told me, one evening when David had gone out for milk, that I should not be intimidated by her. She told me that her husband had taught their son how to love by example, and that I was, therefore, getting the benefit of 50 years of careful training, and that all I had to do was let myself be loved well. "That is not as easy as it sounds, Maximilian," she said. "Many men cannot do it. They will not let themselves. They confuse love with weakness. They confuse being known with being exposed. Do not be one of those men. You owe my son better." "I owe you better," I said. She patted my hand. "You do not owe me anything," she said. "I am very old. I am only here for a little while. You owe my son. You owe him by being someone who knows how to receive what he is offering you. That is all I ask." "Yes, Helen." "Good. Pour me a small bourbon. We will listen to some Bill Evans before David comes back. He thinks I do not know that record I gave you for Christmas was the one his father played the morning we got engaged. He thinks he is the only one who knows things in this family." I laughed. I poured her a bourbon. We listened to Bill Evans. 5 years after that Thanksgiving in Indiana, on a warm September evening, David and I were sitting in our small garden in Andersonville. We had finished dinner. We were drinking the last of a Riesling my mother had sent. The garden was full of late summer light. David had finally bought the Mustang the year before, a 1968 fastback restored by my friend Henrik in Wicker Park. Dark green, perfectly tuned, and it was sitting in the garage on the alley, the small, absurd embodiment of a promise he had made to his 8-year-old self. The dealership was still the dealership. Ronaldo was still my best friend, and now also our best friend, and he and his wife came over for dinner most Sunday nights, and his wife Beatrice had become like a sister to me. My mother had visited from Munich twice. She had been very dignified about all of it, very German, very careful. And on the last day of her second visit, sitting in our small garden, she had taken my hand and said, in German, "Maximilian, I have spent 40 years being afraid of who you would become. I should not have been afraid. I am sorry." My father had not come. My father, in fact, had still not entirely forgiven any of it. We were working on it. We spoke now once a month instead of once a week. The conversations were shorter and stiffer and entirely about the weather. But my mother had told me, in private, that he kept the photographs I sent him of David on the small bookshelf in his study, even though he had never mentioned them. She said this was the most we should expect. She said this was, in his way, a great deal. I was thinking about all of this in the garden that September evening, 5 years in, with a late light catching the glass of David's wine, when David sat forward and said, "Max." "Yes." "Do you remember the day I came into the dealership?" "I remember the day you came into the dealership alone, looking for a Mustang." "No. The first day. The very first day. 6 years before, the first X5. "Yes." "Do you remember what you said to me when we shook hands at the end?" I thought about it. I did not actually remember. We had shaken hands at the end of many of those visits. I remembered him, his face, the wedding ring catching the light. I did not remember what I had said. "No," I said. "Tell me." "You said, 'It was a pleasure to do business with you. I hope we see each other again.' David, I say that to every customer. I know you do. I asked Ronaldo once 6 months in, Whether you said it to everyone, because I had been thinking about it for 6 months. You had been thinking about it for 6 months? I had been thinking about it for 6 years, Max. I bought 6 BMWs. He smiled at me. The slow smile. The one only I got. I had been thinking about it for 6 years, he said. And I never let myself admit, even to myself, that the only reason I was still showing up in your showroom was that you had told me, on the first day, that you hoped you saw me again. And I had decided, somewhere underneath everything else, that I was not going to disappoint you. I looked at him. I looked at the small back garden in Andersonville, and the late September light, and the wine glass, and the 15 years of building toward this exact second. David, I said, I had no idea. I know. You bought 6 BMWs because of one sentence I say to every customer. I bought 6 BMWs because of you. Because of every time you handed me my keys. Because of how you remembered which one we had bought before. Because of the day you let your hand brush mine when you were giving me back my driver's license in the 3rd year, when I told myself it had been accidental, even though I knew somewhere that you had done it on purpose. I had done it on purpose. I had not let myself remember that I had done it on purpose. I started to laugh, and David started to laugh. And the two of us sat in the late light in our garden in Andersonville with a half-empty bottle of Mosel Riesling and laughed at the long way around. 6 BMWs. A personal trainer who turned out to be the wrong story. A wife who had also been hiding. A divorce that had become a friendship. A Charlie Parker recording in October. A bridge in Indiana. A jazz club on Lawrence Avenue. A door inside me that had stayed locked for 19 years. A man with pale gray-blue eyes who had walked in and, simply by being himself, opened it again. David reached across the table and took my hand. He turned it palm up. He traced the lines with his thumb the way he had on the couch in my Streeterville apartment the night he had said the sentence about hiding places. Max, he said. Yes. I have something for you. He reached into his jacket pocket. He took out a small, worn envelope. Cream paper, slightly yellowed at the corners, the kind of envelope you would have used in 1968, the year his father had been in his 20s, the year a 1968 Mustang Fastback had been new. He handed it to me. This was my father's, he said. It was in a box my mother gave me last year when I went down for her birthday. She told me she had been waiting for the right moment to give it to me. She told me she thought I would know when the right moment came to do something with it. I have been carrying it in my jacket pocket for 10 months. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single small black and white photograph and a folded piece of notebook paper. The photograph was of David's father, a young man in his 20s, sitting at a piano in what looked like a small jazz club. There was a glass of something on the piano next to him. He was laughing at someone off camera. He looked, for a startling moment, exactly like David. The notebook paper had 3 sentences on it, in handwriting I assumed was his father's. The first sentence said, "Helen, I think this is the night." The second sentence said, "I think this is the night I find out if she will say yes." The third sentence said, "If she does, I am going to be the kind of man who is brave enough to keep saying yes to her every day for the rest of my life. I am going to take the long way back to where I belong every single day, because she is where I belong." Ronsard, I looked up at David. I could barely see him through the late light. "R," I said. "Robert, my father." Helen kept this. For 51 years. She told me she found it in the pocket of his suit jacket the morning after he proposed. She kept it because she said it was the most honest thing he had ever written down. She told me, when she gave it to me, that she thought I would understand what to do with it eventually. I stared at the small piece of paper. I looked at the photograph of a young black jazz pianist in a small club in 1968. laughing at someone off camera, the year before David's parents had stood on a wooden bridge in Indiana and had agreed to spend the next 50 years saying yes to each other. I looked at David. I understood. He took my hand again. He looked at me with the directness that, after 6 years, after 6 BMWs, and 1 Mustang and a bridge in Indiana, and his mother's bourbon, and a wood stove, and a creek freezing at the edges, I had finally learned to receive. "Will you marry me, Max?" he said. I did not say yes immediately. I sat in the late light. I looked at the wine glass. I looked at the small garden. I looked at the man I had spent the last 5 years building a life with. I let the moment stretch out the way a long ballad does in a good jazz club, the way Coltrane stretches out a single note when he is in no hurry, when he is taking the long way, when he knows the long way is the only way. Then I said, "Yes, David." And then I said, in a quieter voice, "Yes, yes, yes." And then I sat in our garden in Andersonville, on a warm September evening, with my hand in his, with a folded piece of 50-year-old notebook paper on the table between us, with the long late light cutting across the small flagstones the previous owners had laid. And I understood, finally, what David's mother had meant about taking care of what you have been given. I would, every day, for the rest of my life. I would take care of it. We got married 8 months later. It was a small wedding. Helen flew up from Indianapolis. My mother flew in from Munich. My father did not come, but he sent a card, in his careful old-fashioned handwriting, that said only, "Maximilian, be well, be loved." Father. I cried for a long time over that card. So did my mother. So did David. So, eventually, did all of us. Even Ronaldo, who is not a man given to tears and who pretended, very unconvincingly, that something had blown into his eye. Emily and Rachel came. They sat in the second row. Emily wore a soft gray suit. Rachel wore something dark green and laughed at all of David's jokes during the reception. She and Helen got along extremely well. They had a long conversation, late in the evening, about gardening. Trevor sent a card. We invited him. He could not make it, but he sent a card that said, "Wishing you both every happiness. Some marriages are built on what you are not afraid of, and I think yours is. Be well." It was a kind card. I framed it later. We took our honeymoon in Germany. I had not been home in 7 years. We went to Munich. We stayed with my mother. My father was uncertain the first evening, and then a little less uncertain by the second, and by the third evening he was asking David, in his very careful, precise English, what he thought about the renovation work in the local Bahnhof. David, who has the rare and beautiful gift of being able to take any small question seriously, talked with him about the architecture of train stations for almost an hour. My father went to bed that night and told my mother in German that David seemed to be a person of some seriousness. Coming from my father, that was a vow of love. We came back to Chicago. We came back to the little brick coach house in Andersonville with the kitchen window that faced east and the bedroom window that faced west and the long shelf full of jazz records. We came back to our garden. We came back to Ronaldo and Beatrice on Sundays. We came back to my dealership, which was still mine, and David's architecture firm, which was still his, and a city that had become both of ours. We came back, in a way, to nothing dramatic. We came back to a life. And every once in a while, on a slow Tuesday evening, David will pour 2 glasses of wine and put a record on, and we will sit on the small couch in front of the wood-burning fireplace in our little house in Andersonville. And he will lean against me, and he will close his eyes, and I will think about the man I was the morning he first walked into my showroom. The German immigrant who had built a fortress out of carefully spaced loneliness. The 40-year-old who had assumed by then that no door was going to open ever again. The man who had not yet known that some doors do not open on their own, that some doors are opened by a stranger in a charcoal sweater who can identify a Charlie Parker recording from 3 seconds of saxophone. I had built a life on the assumption that I had already become who I was going to become. I had been wrong. I had spent 15 years being wrong. And one Tuesday morning in October, in Lincoln Park in Chicago, in the city I had chosen because I had not been able to imagine the city I actually needed, a man whose wife had been buying my cars for 6 years finally walked in alone and asked me about a Mustang. If you have made it all the way to the end of this story, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for sitting with David and me through all of it. Through the showroom, and the green mill, and the bridge in Indiana, and the wooden bridge over the half-frozen creek where I said yes for the first time, without yet knowing I was saying yes to everything. I want to thank you for letting these two grown men, who had taken the long way around, take the long way around with you listening. I would love to know if you are still here, if the story moved you, if it reminded you of someone, if it made you think about a door you have not yet opened. Please, if you would, leave a comment letting me know what you thought, and give this story a rating from 0 to 10. I read every single comment, every single one. Your ratings, your thoughts, your stories about your own long ways around are the reason I keep telling these stories. And if you believe, after all of this, that love can still find us in the most unexpected places, please consider supporting The Simple Gay Love on Patreon. It is what allows me to keep writing about people like David and Max, who took the long way home and who got there, in the end, exactly when they were supposed to. Helen was right. Some people can only take the long way. But the long way, it turns out, is also the way you arrive somewhere you actually belong. David is in the kitchen right now. I can hear him putting on a record. I think it is Coltrane. I think it is Naima. I think he is going to come into the living room in a moment and sit down next to me and put his head on my shoulder and ask me what I am writing. I think I am going to tell him I am writing about us. I think he is going to smile that slow smile. I think, after all this time, after 6 BMWs and a Mustang, and a wife, and a personal trainer, and a personal trainer's wife, and a wooden bridge in Petersburg, Indiana, that this is what it was always going to come down to. 2 men, 1 couch, 1 record, 1 small house in Andersonville, a door that finally stayed open.
Enjoyed this story? Good, because I have so much more to tell you, but those other ones I can't put out here. It's not for everyone. It's for those who really want to go deep. On my Patreon, the stories are more intense, more free, more real. No censorship, no filter, no limitations. It's the place where I can truly explore everything these characters live, feel, and desire. Things that don't make it out here. And trust me, there's a lot waiting for you. And it's not just content, it's a community. A closed space for those who want real representation, who want to support the LGBTQ+ cause and have access to benefits nobody else has. Early content, behind the scenes, stories only members get to know, and a group of people who think just like you. A place where we can talk about everything, without judgment, without limits. There are already a lot of people inside following stories you don't even know exist yet. And every month, there's something new coming. Getting in is easy. Point your phone camera at the QR code on screen right now, or use the link in the first pinned comment down below, or in the video description. In less than 2 minutes, you're already part of it. See you on the other side.